Am I remembered in Erin? I charge you speak me true. Has my name a sound, a meaning, in the scenes my boyhood knew? These are the words of Thomas D'Arcy McGee, shared by Prime Minister Mulroney at the funeral of the late Ronald Reagan. Like Thomas D'Arcy McGee, it is natural for those who serve in public life to question and wonder whether their memories will live on past their earthly lives. But for Canada's 18th Prime Minister, there is no need to wonder. The Right Honourable Brian Mulroney, the boy from Baie-Comeau, has left a legacy that will shape our country for generations. This evening it is my great honour to conclude the debate in honour of Canada's 18th Prime Minister. Since we first learned of the passing of the Right Honourable Gentleman, so many have shared of his political, policy and transformational accomplishments: free trade, NAFTA, tax reform in the GST, the Acid Rain Treaty, the fight to free Nelson Mandela and end apartheid in South Africa. All of this and more are because of the leadership of Brian Mulroney. Last night I spoke with one of my predecessors, Dr. Harry Brightwell, and his wife Darrell, about their memories of Brian and Mila Mulroney. Darrell shared her memories of what was of Mila and how she was such a lovely representative and lovely person, and how any time she spoke to someone, you were always the center of her attention. For Brian and Mila Mulroney, they were truly a team. Dr. Brightwell observed that as they fought the battles on the ground in communities across Canada, he never realized at the time how momentous the work they were doing really was. But they were truly part of a sea change in Canadian history. In Perth County, we proudly lay claim to Canada's 9th Prime Minister, Arthur Meighen. As one of the greatest orators this House has ever known, Meighen's power of language is rivaled perhaps only by the man we honour here tonight. When Brian Mulroney visited St. Mary's in 1988, he was photographed in front of Arthur Meighen's portrait. And I think it is a striking image that was shared with me by one of our wonderful historic volunteers in St. Mary's. Because Brian Mulroney, like Arthur Meighen, had the confidence to know when tough decisions needed to be made, he would do them and make them for the right decision for Canada. And while the decisions may not have always been popular, time has proven him right. I could certainly speak here for hours about the political and policy legacy of the late Prime Minister. But it is his dedication and commitment to the people of this country and those around him that I wish to focus on. I will always remember the first time that I received one of his famous phone calls. I almost didn't answer it. It was a 514 area code, and I assumed it was probably a wrong number or a telemarketer. But I'm glad I did. There on the other line was the deep and familiar baritone saying, "Hello, John. It's Brian Mulroney calling." He was eager to know about what was happening in the political arena and was most gracious in offering his thoughts and advice. But after he had delved into all the issues of the day, the conversation would turn to family. He wanted to know about my family, about my wife Justine and our 3 children, and he seemed most pleased that our daughter, like his daughter, was named Caroline, and I think he was a little proud that my little girl, Caroline, has a picture of her with Brian Mulroney's Caroline, which she keeps in her room. Because family was important to Brian Mulroney. As some colleagues may know, I have a long, languishing PhD that I've been working on, and it's about the role of caucus. And there was no greater person in dealing with caucus than Brian Mulroney. Prime Minister Mulroney was very gracious in sharing his thoughts with me on caucus. And while I'll share in a few moments more about his relationship with caucus, I want to first say how central family was to him in his service as Prime Minister. He explained to me his daily routine of work in the House of Commons and on Parliament Hill, the extensive outreach he did. He listed the dozens of responsibilities on matters of state, and then very succinctly and matter-of-factly stated, "And then I would go home and have dinner with the kids." Caroline, Ben, Mark, and Nicholas meant the world to him. And over these past few days, we have seen the country join with them in honoring their father. We've lost a Prime Minister, but they've lost a loving father and grandfather. And so I thank them and the wonderful Mila for sharing this remarkable man with us. Now, I do want to share a few words about his relationship with caucus. Until the day he left office, his caucus stood with him. Even in the most difficult times, where their approval rating might have been lower than those who believed that Elvis was still alive, he had a way of bringing his caucus together and building them up. He told me that, quote, "There was nothing more important to me than caucus." And when I asked him about what his secret was, he replied, "Well, John, I would begin my week not on Monday. My week would begin on Wednesday. And I viewed the caucus as members of my family." He would never miss a Wednesday caucus meeting, even if it meant delaying a departure for an international summit. When caucus needed him, he was there for them, and they for him. I remember chatting with the late Ken Monteith, who served as the Member of Parliament for the riding of Elgin, and he recounted one of those similar stories that we've heard tonight, about him chatting briefly with the Prime Minister in the lobby behind the House of Commons. And the Prime Minister asked him how he was doing. He said, "I'm not so well, actually. I just lost my mother-in-law." And by the time Ken got back to his office here on Parliament Hill, Prime Minister Mulroney had called his wife to express his condolences on the loss of her mother. And that is a memory that stuck with Ken for many years to follow. And I think if we can take a personal lesson from Brian Mulroney, it is to pick up the phone, to make those phone calls before those phone calls can no longer be made. Before I conclude, I want to share a few words from Arthur Milnes, a wonderful historian from Kingston, Ontario, who was part of the late Prime Minister's memoirs. And I think this short paragraph really encompasses the Prime Minister's power of storytelling. Arthur writes, "As he did for millions while campaigning, Mr. Mulroney held me in his spell each time. Often the crowds he described became larger and larger as the story continued, but that didn't matter to me. Through him and our private conversations, I too was soon in the arena alongside him, as together we faced in triumph the mighty grits of old." And so as we bid adieu to this remarkable Canadian, I close as I began, with the words of the great Irish-Canadian father of Confederation, Thomas D'Arcy McGee. "From far and near, from isle and glen, came mourning priests and sorrowing men, and with hymns repeated, the sleepless throng waked him with solemn psalter and song. Farewell, Prime Minister. Thank you."